saying starting soon on LinkedIn, but I think let's just go for it. So, hi everyone. Welcome to a live from the source expert insight webinar today. We're going to be talking about website accessibility, and this is a really important topic right now because a new law is coming into force in June 2025, the European Accessibility Act, EAA for short. This act is a really proactive step in the right direction, frankly. The Independent recently reported that disabled job seekers apply for 60% more jobs than non-disabled candidates. So this act can't come soon enough. The EAA will stipulate the levels of accessibility that businesses need to provide across their digital platforms. And today we want to highlight how the EAA will impact recruitment firms. I'm Will. I'm the head of marketing at SourceFlow. We build industry-leading recruitment websites and marketing tools. And today I'm joined by Helen, who's SourceFlow's head of customer experience. Got that right, Helen? And in a moment, Helen's going to be talking about exactly how the Act is likely to impact recruitment agencies and what SourceFlow are doing to support recruitment firms to become compliant. But first, we've got Avneet from website accessibility software company ReciteMe. Avneet's an accessibility specialist, and she's going to give us a clear understanding of the Act and of the risks of non-compliance. So Avneet, can you tell us a bit more about what accessibility actually means in this context and explain a bit more about the Act in detail, please?
Yeah, thank you, Will. Accessibility basically means, in a nutshell, you need to make sure any service or any digital app that you're delivering is accessible for all. So I'm going to be speaking briefly around this EAA regulation, that is the European Accessibility Act, which obviously comes into picture later on this year. Could you go on to the next slide for me, please, Will? So let's dig a little bit deeper exactly into the definition of what is accessibility. Accessibility means something that is accessible to all. Specifically, if we look at the dictionary definition, it basically means that it's a service that is being able to be reached, seen, or understood by the end user. When I say reached, seen, or understood, it should be in the most easy available format for the end user. And what does basically accessibility mean when you're delivering services online? So more so that your users are able to perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with any web content that you're delivering. Simply, that could be simply a form that you're filling online. So making sure that it's in its most accessible form when somebody comes to access that. Could you go on to the next slide for me, please? So basically, now you may question why and who needs our support online. So obviously, we know that there's over 135 million people in Europe that currently live with some sort of disability. Obviously, we need to cater to that wide audience when thinking about making sure that our services are of an accessible nature. Secondly, we have over 30 million people that have a visual impairment. Now, visual impairment is key when you're thinking to deliver accessible content. For example, you need to make sure your content works easily with a screen reader. And thirdly, over 15 million people have some sort of learning disability. So you need to make sure any service, again, that you're delivering is of easily understandable. And lastly, you've got over 14% of people within Europe who don't speak English as their first language. So again, you need to make sure that you're setting the correct parameters when you're delivering your content to make sure that it's accessible to that small 14% of people. Next slide for me, please. But definitely it goes beyond that, and I'm going to explain this with an example further on the next slide, please. We currently know that accessibility can benefit everybody. So if I can draw your attention to this image, firstly, I'll explain what this image is portraying. So you've got a ramp on the left-hand side of the image, and to the right-hand side of the image is you've got a staircase, and then you've got a person who's holding a shovel. So so what we're trying to do is we're trying to cater to the person who's on the wheelchair, as well as a group of children that are to the right-hand side of this image. So it would be easier for us to clear the snow off the ramp so that basically the user on the wheelchair, as well as the group of school children, can access the school entrance. This would basically benefit both users that are involved in this picture. And what you would do here is remove friction for both of the users that are involved, because if you were to remove the snow off the staircase as well as the ramp, you're going to be creating more work, but you're just not going to be trying. What we're trying to do is look for the best solution that would be accessible as well as cater to the needs of both users. Next slide for me, please. So now let's talk about what is the EAA. So EAA stands for the European Accessibility Act 2025. This service is going to be applied to is basically all of your products, your services, as well as your websites. So it's basically going to be harmonizing any accessibility standards. So if you've got a domain, for example, you've within Italy or France, you need to make sure that domain in itself is compliant to WCAG 2.1 AA. What this EAA regulation is going to do, it's basically going to be removing all of the digital barriers that your end users might be facing. What this in turn would do for your business is basically it's going to boost inclusivity of your business, obviously within the EU market, because you're, like we spoke before, you're going to be catering to a small number of users. For example, the 14%, you're going to be helping users that got visual impairment. So anybody and everybody can access your services. And more so, this is going to be a legal requirement for business and services to be compliant by June 2025. Next slide for me, please. So when does this go into effect? So basically any new service that you're going to be delivering after June 2025 needs to be of accessible nature. And when we say accessible nature, again, to WCAG 2.1 AA standards. We'll talk a little bit later about the compliancy levels in depth further ahead. And if you've got any service that exists before June 2025, or it's been created before June 2025, you have a slight window which gives you a grace period, so you can make your services compliant by June 2030. Next slide for me, please. So now you may question, why put in this effort? So what are the risks of non-compliance? Firstly, you've got legal penalties because this is going to be a legal requirement from June 2025. So it's a legal penalty. So you're going to have to make sure that your services are accessible. As well as being a legal penalty, you need to understand that you're catering to a large group of audience. You're going to be helping somebody at the end of the day have a better user experience. For example, simply if somebody wants to search for an item on your site, they want to fill a form, you're going to be making their life a lot easier. At the end of the day, your user's going to have the optimum experience, which in turn would boost your brand reputation and will save you from reputation damage. It's going to make everybody aware that the services that you're delivering are of high benefit for the end user. And also you're going to be having consumer and you're going to avoid consumer and employee dissatisfaction, basically meaning anything that you're delivering is again of an accessible nature. You're not going to be like putting anybody to the side. You're not going to be sort of saying that you can't access this service because you have a certain disability. What we're trying to do is make something that is inclusive and accessible for everybody. Next slide for me, please. So now let's talk about what exactly you need to meet in order to meet the EAA regulation. So in order to meet EAA, it's followed in two parts. So you need to meet WCAG as well as publish an accessibility statement. So WCAG is the technical standard that you should be meeting to obviously meet your EAA regulation. So firstly, what does WCAG stand for? WCAG stands for your Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now, these are the regulations and guidelines that have been put together by your W3C Consortium. This is the governing body that provides the set of guidelines. Like I've mentioned before, to be EAA compliant, you need to be meeting WCAG 2.1 AA. So now WCAG has its three levels. So you've got your A, AA, and AAA. Your level A is your basic standard of a standard. Obviously, it's got something that the minimal things that you must be meeting. So obviously, it's got your 30 success criteria. Now, WCAG is obviously divided into its 3 compliancy levels, and then it's further divided into individual success criteria. And then you've got your next level, which is your AA, which we need to meet for EAA, which is your industry standard level. So this consists of your 50 success criteria. And this is something that you should be doing or is industry appropriate for accessibility. And lastly, you've got your AAA compliancy level, which is obviously your advanced level. And this is something that you could do, but you don't need to consider to be EAA compliant. This is something if you want to enhance the accessibility of your services, or you just want to make things even better for your end user, you could look to explore the AAA standards. And obviously, this consists of your 78 success criteria. I'll pass back to Will now for the next set of slides. Oh, sorry. Before that, I'm just going to quickly mention what are the most common web accessibility issues. Obviously, based on a public sector body's regulation survey, there's a common WCAG failures that we see across many sites, but mostly so when we come across a homepage of a website. The first and foremost one is your low contrast issue. So obviously the contrast should be right between your foreground and your background color. This is often crucial for somebody that's got certain type of visual impairment, or they've got color blindness. If the contrast doesn't meet the minimum threshold, they're going to be having difficulty while they're trying to read content on your screen. And again, we don't want to do that for the end user. We want to make sure everything is most readable for our end user. Not only content, but you need to make sure your items such as your icons, your buttons, they also need to have the correct contrast as well. And the second most common issue is you're missing alt text. Obviously, you've got images. If I'm a visual user, I know what the image is saying to me or what the context is. But if I'm a screen reader user, and if there's a missing alt text, I wouldn't know what that image is trying to convey to me. So what we need to do is at the back end, set the correct alt text, and that could be announced correctly using a screen reader. And then obviously you've got empty links. For example, you might have come across links such as click here, go there. These are quite vague when it comes to somebody who's a screen reader user. You need to make sure that the links that you're giving are of more descriptive nature. For example, click here to view more about Recite Me. It gives the user more context. Click here to view more about source flow. Again, it gives the user a bit more context of what they're trying to visit and what that link would take them to. And then the next issue that we most commonly see is missing form labels. So you've got a form, for example, you need to enter your name, your last name, your date of birth, but there's no label provided at the back end. The user, for example, more so a screen reader user, won't know what the if there's a missing label, the user's not going to be announced what they should be entering for that particular form field. Again, that's crucial because it's just simply going to be saying this is your label A or label B, but again, that needs to be of descriptive nature. So your form label should say, please enter your name, please enter your last name. Again, sometimes you might come across if there's mandatory fields on a form, you need to again specify that within your code to make sure it's again correctly picked up your screen reader. Now this last one here, missing document labels, I would say it's more so for PDFs. And it's commonly we see that PDFs are quite tricky to make accessible and they're widely shared. So it's crucial to make sure whenever you're delivering a PDF, it has the correct document label. Quite similar to missing form labels, but more so if you've correctly labeled your PDF or correctly provided a document label, it would tell a screen reader user that this is what the PDF entails. It could be simply one line, just giving the user more context about your PDF. Next slide for me, please.
I think that's on to source flow now,
It
Daphne.
is.
I mean, I think you made some really great points there, and I think just the scale of the challenge is the one that's really striking to me. The amount of people that have a sort of disability that affects their engagement with a digital platform. It's absolutely huge, and obviously not every disability is a visible disability or one that everyone is going to understand. And when I was reading around this topic, I read that 69% of disabled users will leave a website immediately if they face any accessibility barriers. So that's how important this is. So, I thank you so much for giving such a broad context about how these issues and these challenges impact people. I think it's really, really insightful. Helen, now we want to kind of drill down to our audience, to our customers, to everybody that we work with in the recruitment industry. How will these laws, do you think, impact recruitment businesses?
Quite majorly. So yeah, thanks for your points, Avani, and appreciate everyone joining in. So basically we're Sourceflow, we're recruitment website specialists, and in terms of the impact, it's going to impact a wide range of recruitment businesses. It covers anyone with a headcount of 10 people and above, and anyone with a revenue of £2 million and above. You might be sat here on this webinar thinking that doesn't apply to you right now, but as we know with recruitment companies, you can kind of grow exponentially overnight. So I'd really recommend kind of getting ahead of the curve as soon as possible. Here's a slide of a few of our clients we're working with. Some of these already have Recite Me in place as well, so a bit ahead of the curve. Cool. So why is EA a big deal for recruitment? Well, first of all, you're kind of locking yourself down to only a pigeonhole of the candidates that are available to you outside of automatically. So you've got 60% people with disabilities have 60% apply for 60% more jobs than other people. So you've automatically not got as many candidates. And in terms of the revenue, clients working with those people have got about a 30% increase in revenue compared to others. And we want to make it our goal to allow for 100 of those people to apply for those jobs. Firms that need to take action as soon as possible, really.
That's great. Yeah, I think there's a massive business case for it, isn't there, Helen? Because basically, if your site's not accessible, you're shutting off a huge tranche of candidates and a huge tranche of clients that can't access your materials, convert on your forms, speak to your recruiters. It's absolutely huge. So, it is that important. And Helen, I think you wanted to kind of take people through and help them understand what they've got to do by when.
Yeah, in terms of a timeline, as Avani said, we've got until June the 28th. So anyone that's working with the delivery team at the moment will make sure that you're 100% compliant when you launch. We have got a bit of a grace period until 2030 for anyone that's already live. So if you sat here thinking, I've recently gone live, what's going to happen to me? Well, we'll be working with you to make sure that you're 100% compliant before that deadline and make sure everything's in place for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'd add that anyone who's working with a website provider that hasn't spoken to you about compliance, we're happy to look at your sites and help you with that as well. And I know Recite Me can help you too, and we're going to go on to that in the next couple of slides. Helen, did you want to talk about kind of the asset that we've got available at the moment?
Yeah, so we've been working on a checklist with Recite Me to kind of basically break down each individual bit in a bit more detail, so we can work with our clients to audit the sites, and Recite Me have a tool that will do like on an ongoing basis piece. So if you're interested in that, please scan here and I can work with you guys to kind of make sure your website's up to speed as well.
Yeah, just a bit of a note on this really. This document is meant to be super helpful. It's got the timeline that we just displayed on the previous slide on there, but it's also got a 2-page checklist, which is everything that you need to be considering to become compliant. I'm a former in-house recruitment marketer, 10 years experience doing that, and I know that I'm not going to have the best understanding of every element on that checklist. So it's a kind of do the best you can. But you're going to get to a point where you really kind of need to speak to your website provider and website accessibility tools like Recite Me to really get yourself to that top level of compliance and kind of be ahead of the curve. And also I know Avni put together a few kind of easy fixes that you could kind of do right away to start getting your website more compliant. Avni, did you want to take us through a few of those?
Yeah, can do. Thank you, Will. So like I mentioned before, previously on a survey that we've done, so the most firstly common issue is missing alt text on images. This is quite an easy fix that you could do within obviously your development team, depending on what coding language you're using. For example, if you're using HTML, you can easily go in within the image tag and set the alt description to be of descriptive nature. For example, if I was to describe this image here, I would need to say this is an oval image which has got some alt equals image text, or simply if you want to, for example, just take a more simpler example, if you've got an apple, if I was to give a description of, I would need to say this is a red apple. So again, this is something quite easy that you could do. Firstly, foremostly, go in and add alt description on all your images. The other point on this I would like to make you all aware is that if you've got a decorative image, when I say decorative, for example, the likes of your icons or for example, labels, or if an image is not providing enough context, you need to make sure that you check that with your development team and make sure you mark them as decorative, because they would be announced obviously as decorative by the screen reader. Once you've fixed all your alt text on your images, you can nicely go in and adjust the color contrast of your images. Obviously, you've got an automated color contrast checker that you could use. Now, what that would obviously give you is basically the foreground and background ratio between your content or your icons. You can go in and make sure all of the color contrast is set correctly. And this color contrast checker tool also would give you the correct criteria that you need to be meeting as per WCAG, which is specifically obviously your 1.4.3. And then the last thing that you could do is obviously your page structure. What you could easily go in is make sure you've set the correct headings. A good starting point would be, for example, on your home page, if you've got one heading at the top, make sure that's obviously nicely tagged within a H1 tag, and you've got no more than one H1 within a page. Your H1 is descriptive enough, and you can follow through with the heading structure from H1 to H6. And these are the three easy fixes that you could do, and obviously they help out your accessible users a lot, and more so your screen reader users, and at the end of the day will be making their user experience much more easier for them. Next slide for me, please, Will.
Well, just to jump in there, Avni, I think there's also like an additional benefit to making these fixes happen. Google organic Google algorithms actually prefer you to have populated these fields as well, and for images to be explained and the page structure and the H1 tags, H2 tags to be structured consistently. So what I'm trying to say is, recruitment marketers, if you're on this webinar, this actually will help your organic SEO, because your images will have a good description. They may even have your keywords in there as well. Same with your H1 tags and stuff like that. So getting this stuff sorted not only makes the site more accessible to people with disabilities, but also to Google. Sorry, Avni, I'll let you do this slide now.
No worries. Yeah, and just a quick one from me. If you wanted to sort of run a free website EAA compliance check, we can provide that for yourselves. If you wanted to scan the QR code on your screen, you should be able to sort of find out about the next steps, yeah, and get in touch with us, and we can provide you as a starting step on what you need to do on EAA.
That's great. So how does it work actually, Avni? I haven't clicked through. Do they just drop in a URL and it sort of goes through the site?
Yes, yeah. That's what you can do pretty much, yeah. And then you should be able to scan your homepage through that. And again, it'll give you, well, obviously, the compliance levels and the errors that are found within the homepage, like we discussed before.
Oh, fantastic. And how long does it take? Just a minute, a couple of seconds, or?
Just a few minutes. It depends on obviously just the complexity of your site. So if you've got a lot of components, it'll just take slightly longer. But obviously, if your site's less complex, it's just going to be a fair few minutes. But it shouldn't take you a lot of time, because it will just be the homepage that you'll be scanning.
Fantastic, brilliant.
Amazing.
What a useful tool. I know we've run our own website through that and been making changes since using it. So thanks so much to Recruitment for putting that together. What a great tool. We've got a question on the chat, guys, that maybe you can answer. Helen said, if our website is already live,
Yeah.
do any new pages we add post June 2025 still have the 2020-30 grace period, or do they need to be fully compliant when launched? It's a tricky one. Do you know the answer to that one, Avneet?
So obviously, if your website is already live, you would fall into that grace period. But if you're sort of launching any new pages on that site after obviously June 28, 2025, I would recommend making them accessible, because you've got small pages to work on. So if you make them accessible, then obviously you can look at rest of the site afterwards. It will be a good starting point to sort of making them additional pages accessible, and then move forward with the larger piece of website that you would have.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say what we'll be doing is, as part of QA, say if it's adding a new page, is making sure that we're going through that checklist like we're doing during the delivery process at the moment for any kind of new add-ons that's in support and within delivery.
And I'd probably just add to that is that, so as part of this, it kind of goes offline. And at the point at which you're kind of developing your brand guidelines, you probably need to be considering your brand guidelines in line with the contrast levels that Avneet talked about earlier in her presentation, because you're going to have a range of brand colors. And if you've been laying up ones that are not contrasting enough in the past, it's really worth thinking about this. And the other thing I would say is this grace period up to 2030, it does give you some wriggle room. But really, if you want to if you're looking at this not only from an accessibility point of view, but from a business case, it's a competitive advantage if you can comply sooner rather than later. Because some of the restrictions are, if you don't become compliant, you will not be able to trade in certain European, and depending on the requirements by different countries on the level of accessibility, you may not be able to trade in certain territories if you are not compliant. So this stuff is, whilst you've got the grace period to 2030, it's really important to kind of start thinking about it and work out a plan for maybe the next couple of years, even if you don't have to be ready for 2030. Sorry.
Definitely. I mean, the checklist that we've got is great for like an initial auditor. I'm right in thinking, Avneet, your software also provides like ongoing monitoring. If they sign up with Recruitment on a regular basis, it'll kind of say, you know, if they've added more blogs in the future and they haven't got alt tags, that will kind of pick it up. Is that right to say?
Yeah, so if you've added any new content, so it's like accessibility is always an ongoing process. So if you add a new blog, if you've added any new content, you'd go in, rescan, it will give you a fresh set of results saying these are the sections that you are not compliant on. Please go ahead and fix these issues. Yeah, so you can sort of do those thorough checks that you should be doing within the year anyway.
Yeah. I'd recommend to any clients kind of like retraining your brain and kind of like the standard things you do when it comes to like posting content. Well, actually, how can we level up and trying to make that the new norm?
Absolutely. Yeah, and there was one thing that I wasn't sure about, Avneet, from my understanding. So obviously you've kind of got these standards and criteria about the size of business that needs to be compliant, 10 employees or more, or a turnover of 2 million euros or more. But is it by 2030, are those going to be the same standards, or will it be all businesses need to comply?
Those standards will still stay the same. So the
Right,
only,
okay.
yeah.
So it's as long as so if you're just starting out, then this doesn't necessarily apply to you. But if you've got any sort of growth plans, and like Helen said, you know, people will skyrocket overnight in the recruitment industry, you still need to be considering this, really.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
If you want to expand into another market, a drop of a hat, you will be able then to do so. Yeah, cool. I don't think we've got any other questions, guys. Was there any final comments that you wanted to make at all?
Don't think so from me. If anyone wants to go through the auditing checklist once they've downloaded it, you know, please reach out to myself and we can kind of work through it together.
Oh yeah, I'll just put that slide back on. Yeah, this is your last chance to scan it through, guys. I'll drop the link in the comments on the LinkedIn page as well, so people can download it afterwards. But if anyone wants it right now, feel free to scan it, and I'll put the website checker from Recite back on there for the final comments. Thanks so much for joining us today for this episode of From the Source Expert Insight. Been great to see so many people on the call. I think we've had nearly 40, which is fantastic. Hopefully this will be the first step in your journey to becoming more compliant. And we look forward to speaking to you about how we can improve your website moving forward.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.